Never in the history of Northern Ireland has one man stirred such strong feelings. Loved by some, loathed by others, everyone had an opinion on Ian Paisley. For decades he became known as Dr No, as he resisted all efforts to share power with nationalists or Republicans. Over time he changed. It was a slow conversion. From throwing snowballs at a visiting Taoiseach in the 1960s to a warm embrace with Bertie Ahern in the Unionist heartland of North Antrim. But this wasn't the biggest turnaround in the latter years of the Paisley political career. These are the pictures that many thought they would never see. The leader of hardline unionism sitting at Stormont with the leader of republicanism. The DUP and Sinn Féin together in a power-sharing executive. It was a move made possible by the St Andrews Agreement of 2006, which allowed the DUP to claim they had overturned the Good Friday Agreement, wringing commitments from Republicans which they said made them acceptable to Unionists as power-sharing partners. But it was a move which unsettled the grassroots and led to the resignation of Ian Paisley as leader of the church he founded, the Free Presbyterians. His easy relationship with the Deputy First Minister Martin McGuinness, they became known as the Chuckle Brothers, was a further source of unease within the party. By 2008, it was time to go. He stood down as DUP leader and First Minister. At the time, he said he was going voluntarily, but in a BBC interview in January 2014, he claimed he had been pushed.
Nigel Dodds said to me, we want you to be gone by Friday. I just more or less smirked, and Peter said, oh, no. He says, you need to stay in for another couple of months. But I sort of laughed at one wanted 2 months to prepare the way for himself, and the other one, I don't know what he wanted.
His interview showed how strained relations had become with the party he helped found, and in particular highlighted tensions with Peter Robinson, who succeeded him as party leader and First Minister.
There was a beast here who was prepared to go forward to the destruction of the party.
Ian Paisley's claims were rejected by his former party colleagues, who said his recollection of the events was wrong. Ian Richard Kyle Paisley was born in Armagh in 1926. His father was a Baptist minister. His mother too was a preacher. He grew up in Ballymena, a town which was to become his political power base. But long before the birth of Paisley the politician, there was Paisley the preacher. He delivered his first sermon at a mission hall in County Tyrone at the age of 16. 4 years later he was ordained, still only 25. And he created his own Free Presbyterian Church. It was in the 1960s when politics came to the fore. Nationalism and republicanism were the enemy, and Ian Paisley was ready for battle. He believed the Dublin government could not be trusted, and when the then Taoiseach Sean Lemass was invited to Belfast in 1965 by Prime Minister Terence O'Neill, Dr Paisley was outraged. He led 1,000 loyalists to Stormont. It was proof, if proof were needed, that he was now both a religious and a political leader.
If this is the way that O'Neill wants to play it, we declare our intention from this platform that we will organise massive demonstrations continually.
The arrival of another Taoiseach, Jack Lynch, at Stormont 2 years later provoked a snowball protest. He was never afraid to take to the streets to make his point. He was sent to prison in 1968, convicted of organising an illegal march. Thousands protested. The membership of the Free Presbyterian Church doubled, and on his release he was greeted as a martyr.
Don't surrender! And God save the King!
He mounted his own counter-demonstrations against the Civil Rights Campaign, and in 1970 he stood as a Protestant Unionist and was elected to the Stormont Parliament. It was the start of a remarkable career.
Ian Richard Kyle Paisley, 7,981.
Soon he was elected to Westminster, taking the North Antrim seat. The following year he founded the Democratic Unionist Party and began a long battle with the Ulster Unionists for the trust of the Unionist people. Politics was never quite the same again. He opposed the formation of a power-sharing executive at Stormont in 1973. He was abroad during the early stages of the Loyalist workers' strike, but was quickly involved on his return. The strike brought services in Northern Ireland to a standstill. Eventually the executive collapsed, and with it went the Unionist leadership of Brian Faulkner. Paisley was left as the undisputed champion of hardline Unionists. In the first European election in 1979, he topped the poll. This was to become a habit, allowing him to claim that he was the most popular politician in Northern Ireland. He may have been anti-European.
As far as the EEC are concerned, it has wrecked our country. The sooner we're out of it, the better. But as long as I'm there, I'll be fighting for Ulster, fighting for the farmer, the consumer, the producer, and everybody in Ulster.
No surrender.
And no surrender.
He quickly established a reputation as a hard-working MEP. Whether in Brussels or Westminster, he lobbied hard on behalf of his constituents, regardless of their religion. But to his enemies, he was still a hate figure, as a bigot and a dangerous presence. They pointed to his involvement with Ulster resistance.
The RUC tell me that I'm breaking the law because I put a red berry on my head with an Ulster badge in it. It's time we stood up and told the RUC.
Ian Paisley was always his own man, but the signing of the Anglo-Irish Agreement in 1985 saw him joining forces with the then Ulster Unionist leader James Molyneux. They filled Belfast city's centre with a protest rally.
Where do the terrorists return to for sanctuary? To the Irish Republic. And yet Mrs. Thatcher tells us that that republic must have some say in our province. We say never, 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 never.
Together, the two leaders adopted a policy of non-cooperation with the government. They resigned their Westminster seats, forcing by-elections, which they later contested and won. But ultimately, the Molyneux-Paisley relationship turned sour. The parting of the ways had been on the cards for some time. During inter-party talks at Stormont in the early 90s, there was no common strategy. The Ulster Unionists were prepared to go to Dublin to talk to the Republic's government. The DUP were not. By now they were prepared to talk again to the British government, but relations were frosty. Margaret Thatcher was never forgiven for the Anglo-Irish Agreement, and her successor John Major enjoyed a tempestuous relationship with Dr Paisley. One meeting at Downing Street ended abruptly, with the DUP delegation asked to leave immediately. They were convinced a secret deal had been done to secure the 1994 IRA ceasefire. The peace process gave fresh impetus to Ian Paisley. He opposed it from the beginning. He agreed to go to the multi-party talks at Stormont in 1996, but when Sinn Féin were allowed in the following year, the DUP leader walked out. He came back on the night before Good Friday to protest. The subsequent agreement started a battle for the soul of unionism. The referendum debate brought Dr Paisley face to face with the Ulster Unionist leader David Trimble in the battle for votes. 3 years before, they had been the heroes of Drumcree, helping the Orangemen get down the Garvaghey Road. Now they were at loggerheads.
In the last 2.5 years,
to destroy the union.
in the last two and a half
destroy the
years,
union.
I have been giving the people a
1988
chance.
1988, he said he was prepared to break the union.
That is not true.
And he has had his approval. That's your own document, What Choice for Ulster by David Trimble.
In the end, the Yes camp won.
Yes, 71.12%.
The new assembly brought the DUP leader into the same political arena as Sinn Féin. Ian Paisley never hid his hatred for republicanism, but it didn't stop him nominating 2 DUP ministers in the new executive. The Assembly didn't last long though, and it was suspended indefinitely in October 2002. Another election loomed, and yet again battle was joined for the leadership of unionism.
When are we going to have the debate? When are you going to stop running away?
In the vote for the Assembly in 2003, the DUP finally overtook the Ulster Unionists. As MP, MEP and Assembly member, Ian Paisley had been at the forefront of politics for over 30 years. He decided not to stand again for Europe in 2004, but his message remained the same.
And I promise you, with all my heart and with all my soul, and with holy oath to heaven, that never again are we going to have terrorists in the government of Ulster.
As a religious leader too, his defence of Protestant principles was undiminished. He protested at the presence for the first time ever of the Catholic primate at the Presbyterian General Assembly. Ian Paisley and his wife Eileen had 5 children. She was never far from his side, and his favourite slogan at election time was "Vote for my wife's husband." His career in public life spanned 2 generations. Speaking in a BBC documentary in January 2014, he talked about his life.
I have no major regrets. I'm not an infallible. I never claimed to be the Pope. I just was just Ian Paisley, an Ulster man. And I look back, I have regrets. I have regrets that we're not yet out of the difficulties that we have been in. But I have also a rejoicing in my heart that I kept the faith.
Ian Paisley was big in stature and big in voice. He was hated and admired in equal measure. Whilst people will differ on his contribution, all will agree that over many decades, as a preacher and a politician, he left his mark on Northern Ireland.